What if one of the most magnificent buildings in the world could disappear completely in a single generation? Why did Jesus warn his followers not to panic when wars, disasters, and chaos begin spreading across the earth? And what if the signs people fear most are actually reminders that history is moving exactly where God said it would? As Jesus stood near the temple in Jerusalem, some people around him admired the beauty of the massive structure. The temple was one of the greatest architectural wonders of the ancient world. Giant stones formed enormous walls. Precious decorations reflected sunlight brilliantly. To many Jewish people, the temple represented security, identity, and God's presence among the nation. It looked permanent, unshakable, untouchable. But Jesus suddenly said something shocking. The days will come when not one stone will be left on another. Imagine the silence after hearing those words. For many listeners, the destruction of the temple sounded impossible. How could something so glorious collapse completely? Yet Jesus saw beyond visible appearances into the future, and history proved his words true. About 40 years later, the Roman army destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in devastating fashion. The structure people believed would stand forever disappeared in fire and chaos. That alone reveals something important. Human beings constantly place confidence in things appearing permanent. Nations, economies, institutions, technology, power, wealth. But history repeatedly reminds humanity that earthly systems remain fragile. Even the strongest empires eventually fall. The temple looked indestructible, yet it vanished. And Jesus used that reality to begin teaching about something even larger, the uncertainty of the last days and the end of the age. Naturally, the disciples asked, when will these things happen? What signs will appear? People have always wanted certainty about the future. Humans crave timelines, predictions, control, especially during fearful times. But Jesus immediately gave an important warning. Do not be deceived. That warning matters deeply because fear often creates vulnerability to deception. When people panic, they become desperate for answers, desperate for certainty, desperate for leaders promising control. Jesus warned that false messiahs and deceivers would appear claiming special authority. And honestly, history proves him right repeatedly. Across generations, people have followed charismatic figures promising salvation, certainty, or secret knowledge about the end. Fear makes deception attractive. That is why Jesus emphasized discernment before predictions. Truth matters more than panic. Then Jesus described wars, uprisings, earthquakes, famines, and diseases. At first glance, these descriptions feel terrifyingly familiar. Every generation witnessing global crises wonders, is this the end? But notice something important. Jesus specifically said, the end will not come right away. In other words, chaos alone does not automatically mean immediate final destruction. Human history in a fallen world includes conflict, suffering, and instability. Jesus was not calling his followers into panic, he was preparing them for endurance. That changes the tone completely. Instead of obsession with fear, Jesus emphasized faithfulness during uncertainty. And honestly, uncertainty defines human existence more than people like admitting. No one fully controls tomorrow. No one guarantees stability forever. Nations rise and fall, economies change, disasters happen unexpectedly. The illusion of total security collapses quickly. But Jesus offered something deeper than worldly stability, confidence rooted in God's sovereignty. Another striking part of his teaching involves persecution. Jesus warned his followers they would face arrest, betrayal, hatred, and suffering because of his name. That must have sounded deeply unsettling. Many people assume following God should automatically produce comfort and acceptance. Yet Jesus repeatedly taught the opposite. Faithfulness sometimes creates opposition. Truth challenges darkness. Conviction disrupts comfortable lies. And throughout history, countless believers experienced exactly what Jesus described. Some lost families, some lost freedom, some lost lives. Yet Christianity continued spreading across the world despite persecution. Why? Because fear could not extinguish genuine conviction. Jesus even told his followers not to worry excessively beforehand about defending themselves because he would give them wisdom their opponents could not resist. That promise reveals another profound truth. God's presence remains with believers even during suffering. Not always removing hardship immediately, but strengthening people through it. And many Christians throughout history testify precisely to that reality. peace appearing during impossible circumstances, strength beyond human ability, hope surviving persecution. Another powerful statement Jesus made was, "By your endurance, you will gain your lives." Modern culture often glorifies instant results and quick comfort, but biblical faith frequently emphasizes endurance, continuing faithfully through uncertainty, trusting God through suffering, remaining steadfast despite fear. Endurance reveals where hope truly rests. When life becomes unstable, superficial faith often collapses quickly, but deep roots survive storms. Jesus also described Jerusalem eventually surrounded by armies and great distress coming upon the land. Again, history records devastating fulfillment when Roman forces destroyed the city in AD 70. The suffering during that period became horrific beyond imagination, and yet Jesus had warned beforehand, not to create terror, but preparation. That distinction matters. God's warnings throughout Scripture often aim toward awakening rather than panic. Humanity tends drifting into false security easily. People assume life will continue normally forever. That stability remains guaranteed, that moral choices carry no eternal consequences. But Jesus repeatedly reminded listeners that history moves toward accountability and fulfillment. One fascinating aspect of this passage is how Jesus intertwines near-term events with larger end-times imagery. The destruction of Jerusalem became both historical reality and symbolic reminder that earthly systems remain temporary. Even sacred-looking structures can collapse. Only God's kingdom ultimately endures forever. That perspective changes how believers view the world. Earthly things matter, but none remain ultimate. Careers end, empires fall, technology becomes obsolete, bodies age, everything temporary eventually fades. And honestly, people often avoid thinking about that reality because it feels uncomfortable. Modern culture distracts itself constantly. Entertainment, consumption, noise, achievement. Anything preventing deeper reflection about mortality and eternity. But Jesus invited people into sober awareness instead. Not hopeless fear, but spiritual readiness. Another dramatic image Jesus described involved signs in the sun, moon, and stars, along with nations in anguish and people fainting from terror over what comes upon the world. These descriptions carry cosmic scale, creation itself trembling, humanity realizing suddenly how little control it truly possesses. And perhaps that exposes one of humanity's deepest fears, losing control. People spend enormous energy constructing predictable lives, schedules, plans, financial systems, structures. Yet one crisis can unravel illusions quickly. Pandemics, wars, economic collapse, natural disasters. Suddenly, human fragility becomes obvious. Jesus did not deny such realities. He confronted them honestly. But then he said something extraordinary. When these things begin to take place, stand up and lift up your heads, because your redemption is drawing near. Notice the contrast. While others collapse in terror, believers lift their heads in hope. Why? Because followers of Christ understand history differently. Chaos does not mean God lost control. It means history continues moving toward ultimate restoration. Fear dominates when people believe existence lacks meaning or direction, but biblical hope declares history has purpose. God remains sovereign even when the world appears unstable. That perspective transforms how believers respond to crises. Not denial, not naive optimism, but resilient hope. Jesus then used a simple illustration from nature. When fig trees begin sprouting leaves, people recognize summer approaching. Likewise, spiritual discernment recognizes signs revealing history unfolding according to God's purposes. Again, the emphasis was not obsessive date-setting. Jesus consistently resisted giving precise timelines. Instead, he emphasized watchfulness and readiness. And honestly, humans struggle with that tension. People want certainty without dependence, control without faith. But Jesus invited continual readiness rather than exact prediction. Live awake, live faithful, live prepared spiritually, because no generation controls the timing fully. Another deeply important warning appears later in the passage. Jesus said, "Be careful, or your hearts will be weighed down with carousing, drunkenness, and the anxieties of life." That phrase, anxieties of life, feels incredibly modern. People today drown in anxiety constantly. Fear about the future, fear about finances, fear about politics, fear about health, fear about global instability, and anxiety can become spiritually numbing. Some people escape through distraction, others through addictions, others through endless consumption of fear-driven information. Jesus warned against becoming spiritually asleep, not merely through sinful pleasure, but through anxiety itself. Why? Because fear can consume attention so completely that people lose eternal perspective. That remains incredibly relevant today. Modern media thrives on outrage and panic. Fear captures attention effectively, but constant fear weakens spiritual clarity. Jesus instead called his followers into alertness rooted in prayer and trust. Be always on the watch and pray. Watchfulness and prayer. Awareness without panic. Faith without denial. Hope without ignorance. That balance matters enormously. Some people become obsessed with end-time speculation while neglecting love, humility, and faithfulness daily. Others ignore spiritual realities completely while focusing entirely on temporary concerns. Jesus called for steady readiness instead. Live faithfully because life is temporary. Stay spiritually awake because eternity matters. Trust God because worldly systems remain fragile. Another profound lesson emerges from the temple destruction itself. People assumed visible religious structures guaranteed spiritual security, but buildings alone cannot save. Religious systems alone cannot save. Only genuine relationship with God matters eternally. The temple symbolized God's presence historically, but Jesus himself became the greater meeting place between God and humanity. And after his death and resurrection, believers understood something revolutionary. God's presence was no longer confined to one physical structure. The temple fell, but God's kingdom continued expanding globally. No empire could stop it. No destruction could erase it. That reality offers hope even during cultural uncertainty today. Church buildings may change, nations may shift, cultures may transform, but Christ remains, his truth remains, his promises remain, his kingdom remains. And perhaps that is why Jesus repeatedly shifted focus away from fear and toward faithfulness. The goal was never panic about future events. The goal was trust. Trust that God remains sovereign despite chaos. Trust that redemption approaches. Trust that temporary suffering does not define eternity. That trust becomes anchor during unstable times, because instability exposes where hope truly rests. If hope depends entirely upon worldly stability, crises destroy peace quickly. But if hope rests in God's eternal kingdom, believers can endure uncertainty differently. Not perfectly, not fearlessly every moment, but with deeper foundation underneath fear. Jesus knew human history would include suffering, deception, wars, disasters, and persecution. Yet he also knew resurrection was coming, redemption was coming, restoration was coming, and ultimately that larger story changes everything. The final picture in this passage is beautiful, quietly. Each day Jesus taught in the temple. Each night he went out to the Mount of Olives. Crowds gathered early every morning to hear him. Even as opposition increased, people still longed for truth, and perhaps humanity still does. Beneath fear, confusion, and instability, people search for hope strong enough surviving uncertainty. Jesus offered exactly that. Not false guarantees of easy life, not escape from every hardship, but eternal hope rooted in God's unshakable kingdom. Empires fall, temples collapse, history trembles, yet Christ remains. And for believers, that changes how the future is faced. Not with hopeless terror, but with watchful faith. Thank you for watching this video. If this message encouraged you to trust God more deeply during uncertain times, please like this video, subscribe to Holy Path Insights, and share this message with someone needing hope today. May we remain spiritually awake, faithful, and full of trust, as we remember that no matter how unstable the world becomes, God's kingdom stands forever and redemption draws near for those who belong to Christ.